Look at the tags on your clothes. Flip over the bottom of your coffee mug. Walk out to your garage and read the stamped steel on the tools hanging from the pegboard. You are looking at the remnants of a broken generational promise. Walk with me for a second. Picture a chain-link fence in Ohio, or Michigan, or Pennsylvania. The padlock on the gate is rusted shut. The weeds have pushed through the cracked asphalt of a parking lot that used to hold 4,000 cars. If you stand there long enough, the silence is deafening. In 1970, that same dirt vibrated with the raw, violent energy of creation. The hiss of pneumatic presses, the blinding glare of molten steel, the proud, stubborn roar of a country building its own future. Today, nothing moves. Success is a lagging indicator. When those factory doors finally locked, the actual failure had happened a decade earlier, thousands of miles away, in a carpeted boardroom on Wall Street. You aren't waiting for the economic shift. You are standing in the rubble. We were told a story. It was a neat, clean story about progress. They told us that America was graduating. We were moving past the dirty, sweaty work of bending metal and melting glass. We were becoming a knowledge economy. We would design the future on sleek computers in California, and someone else, somewhere else, would do the menial work of putting it together. It was a lie, and we are paying the bill for it right now. To understand how we broke the engine of the American middle class, you have to look at the transition from stakeholder capitalism to shareholder primacy. There was a time when a corporation had a web of unwritten obligations to its workers, who bought homes and put kids through college on a single wage, to its community, which built schools and parks around the tax base of the plant, to the product itself, which had to be good enough to bear the family name. Then came the late 1970s. Manufacturing employment in the United States peaked at nearly 19.5 million jobs. It was the high watermark of industrial security. But behind closed doors, the philosophy shifted. The high priests of economic efficiency declared that a company had only one true purpose: to maximize value for the shareholder. Every other obligation was a distraction. Corporate executives became addicted to the efficiency narcotic of arbitrage. Global labor arbitrage is just a sterile academic term for a brutal reality. It means looking at a loyal machinist in Ohio making $25 an hour and realizing you can hire someone in a developing nation to do the same task for 50 cents an hour, without safety regulations, without health care, and without a pension. It was an economic superpower's version of a quick fix. The numbers on the quarterly spreadsheets looked spectacular. Costs plummeted, profit margins soared, the stock market cheered, but it was an addiction. Once you take the first hit of that cheap foreign labor, you can't stop. You have to keep chasing the next low-cost destination, moving from country to country, always running away from the rising standard of living you leave behind. This triggered the era of the ghost brand. Companies realized they didn't actually need to make anything to make money. They just needed to mine the trust reservoir. Think about the brands your parents or grandparents swore by: the boots that lasted 20 years, the washing machine that never broke down, the tractor that passed from father to son. Those companies spent a century building a reservoir of deep, unshakable consumer trust. It was built on sweat, heavy iron, and obsessive quality control. The modern corporate raider looked at that reservoir and saw an asset to be liquidated. They executed death by 1,000 optimizations. They kept the historic logo. They kept the patriotic, sepia-toned commercials featuring rugged farmers and clean-cut workers. But they hollowed out the actual human machinery that built the reputation. They shifted production overseas to a nameless contract manufacturer. They substituted forged steel for stamped plastic. They thinned the glass, weakened the bearings, and shortened the lifespan. They sold you a ghost wrapped in a flag. They mined decades of your family's trust just to juice a single quarterly earnings report. It was the economic equivalent of burning your own living room furniture to keep the corporate house warm for the winter. You get a sudden burst of heat, but eventually you run out of wood, and the house is still freezing. The damage was quiet at first. It hid behind cheap consumer goods. Your television got bigger and cheaper. Your clothes became disposable. But a society cannot maintain its structural integrity on cheap electronics alone. By the time the calendar turned to 2001, the dam broke. The North American Free Trade Agreement had already rewritten the rules. Then China entered the World Trade Organization. The floodgates opened. A massive shockwave ripped through the American heartland. Millions of manufacturing jobs vanished in the blink of an eye. Not because the workers stopped producing, but because the system decided their communities were no longer worth the cost of admission. Now we find ourselves in the reality of the mid-2020s. The headlines talk about nearshoring and reshoring. Politicians stand in front of half-built semiconductor plants, promising a grand renaissance of American industry. They want to bring the factories back, but they are running headfirst into the complexity trap of the missing skill set. You see, when you outsource a factory, you don't just move an assembly line. You don't just ship blueprints across an ocean. You dismantle an entire ecosystem. You lose the tool and die makers. You lose the industrial engineers. You lose the master machinists, the metallurgists, and the tribal knowledge that can only be passed down from a mentor to an apprentice on a grease-stained shop floor. That knowledge cannot be learned from a textbook or downloaded from a server. It is a living, breathing muscle. And if you don't use it for 40 years, the muscle atrophies. We are realizing with a sense of quiet panic that we have eroded our human infrastructure. We have a generation of brilliant software developers who can write code for an app, but we have a critical shortage of the people who know how to calibrate the precision machines required to build the physical world. The tribal knowledge is gone. It retired, went to the grave, or took a job at a big box retail store when the plant shut down. You cannot build a high-tech manufacturing superpower on a foundation of missing skills. The result is a K-shaped economy of belonging. Look at how the country has split. On one arm of the K, you have the hyper-optimized, gleaming digital tech hubs, cities of glass and steel where wealth is abstract, moving through fiber optic cables in milliseconds. It is a world of metrics, algorithm optimization, and relentless efficiency. On the other arm of the K, you have the hollowed-out towns left behind by the Great Hollow-out. Drive through them. The grand brick buildings on Main Street are boarded up. The historic theater is dark. The local bank is gone. The vibrant, bustling town square has been replaced by a grim landscape of dollar stores, payday lenders, and despair. When a factory closes, a town doesn't just lose wages, it loses its anchor. It loses the civic pride that comes from looking at a train car rolling down the tracks and knowing that your hands built the product inside it. A community cannot A/B test its way back to dignity. You cannot replace the profound, soul-deep satisfaction of physical labor with a service sector gig that pays minimum wage without a set schedule. The social decay we see around us, the addiction crises, the fracturing of families, the deep, bitter political resentment, these are not random occurrences. They are the lagging indicators of economic abandonment. They are the bill coming due for 40 years of choosing the cheapest price tag at the expense of our own people. A nation cannot survive as a society of pure consumers. We cannot simply sit on the couch and consume what the rest of the world creates, paying for it with debt and financial gymnastics. Production is the bedrock of sovereignty. When you lose the pride of building things, you lose the capability to shape your own destiny. You become dependent on the stability of fragile global supply chains and the goodwill of geopolitical rivals. You lose the collective confidence that built the modern world. When you lose the pride of building, you lose the soul of the country. So look again at that tool in your garage or that appliance in your kitchen. Ask yourself what it really cost. Not the dollar amount printed on the receipt, but the hidden cost. The cost measured in closed schools, abandoned towns, and a generation of Americans who were told that their labor no longer mattered. We are running out of brand equity to mine. The trust reservoir is dry. The choice in front of us isn't about economics, trade policy, or corporate tax structures. It is a question of identity. It is about whether we still have the grit, the patience, and the collective will to rebuild the human machinery we so carelessly threw away. Every time we click Buy Now on a product engineered to break in 2 years, we vote for our own obsolescence. We traded the security of our neighbors for a handful of disposable conveniences, forgetting that a country which stops making things eventually stops making sense. The boarded up windows of the Rust Belt are not just scenery. They are a mirror reflecting a culture that forgot how to sweat. If we want to reclaim our future, we have to start valuing the hands that build it or get used to living in the ruins of what used to be a superpower.